some time ago, Haute42, now Cosmox Gaming, sent over the T16, and it's a full-size, really lap-comfortable, very thin controller that I really liked. Out of the three I reviewed, I think that was my top pick. And now they sent over the T16 Pro. And no, it doesn't come like this from the factory. I'm going to show you the base model and how I enhanced it later on in this video. Also, why is it the T16 Pro? It looks pretty identical, right? Well, it does come with the crystal switches, but I've installed something else they sent me. The wind engine switch. So we're going to be reviewing both switches, as well as, if you can really see very closely on your screen, I've got this little guy sticking out. And what's this little guy? This is the BOOTER 5, and I think it's the smallest PlayStation 5 authentication device on the market for GP2040. It's even smaller than Magic Boots, and I'm going to compare them to a few other units. And in this Cosmox variety review, you're just going to see the T16 Pro, what makes it different, as well as a few of the switches and their differences between the stock reds, the wind engine, and the crystal. And I'll tell you just right now, the BOOTER 5 is pretty amazing and very small. So if you want the smallest pass-through device, you might be looking at it. Anyhow, this is Zevros with the arcade stick, and let's get started. The first product in this variety view I want to tackle is the T16 Pro. And this is kind of a refresh of the original T16, which I really love, and it's one of my most used controllers. So just to show you, again, with Cosmox, you get the usual stuff, rubber feet, a little switch puller, and some little rubber nubs for the option buttons so you can customize those a little bit. You do get some instructions, and this time it comes with a right angle USB cable, so there's that. So let's take a look at the controller itself. And if you look at it just off the bat and you look at the regular T16, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot different, if anything at all. And really, this is the T16 version 1.2, and I'm going to explain why. Just to show off the differences here, so you can see 4 option buttons, 1 turbo screen, and the infamous 16-button layout. Well, let's lay over the old T16 original, and yes, I've customized this, of course. 4 buttons here, turbo over here, same 16-button layout, same screen, same ports. What gives, right? Well, if we look under one of these caps, you'll see that we have this clear switch. Now, in the original, we had the chalk V2 reds, which are linear switches. These crystal ones are also linear switches, and we're going over more of them in the review here. And the nice thing is they don't wobble as much, and they're made of polycarbonate, so I feel like it's a firmer, crisper switch. So that's a nice upgrade, I believe. And if you have a choice between the T16 Pro and previous version, I'd go for the Pro. Another thing that's a little bit of a change is just a bit of cleanup on the board. So there used to be L&R traces here that you would see on a stock T16. Those have been removed, so that's just a nice touch. And there's a bit more logos. And on the back, I think this got cleaned up a little bit. I haven't seen mine in forever, so I don't know. Anyhow, so really it's just the changeover to crystal switches and a little bit of just tidying up on the board that sets the T16 Pro ahead of the original T16. Next up in this Cosmox variety review, we have the BOOTER 5, and that is their plug-in adapter for pass-through ports to let you use your Haute42 or other GP2040 products on PlayStation 5. And yep, it's just a little guy, it plugs in. And just to give you a comparison, this is probably the lowest profile adapter out there. Let's go ahead and put the Magic Boots up against it. You can see, yep, that is just a bit smaller. And it's definitely smaller than some of those other adapters out there, like the N5 or the F5. So if you really, really need a super low profile PS5 authentication device to work with GP2040, then yep, Cosmox has you covered with the BOOTER 5. Up next in this mini review video is the Crystal Switch by Haute42 Cosmox. And yeah, as they live up to their name, As you can see, they're very clear, so they're great for light transmissibility if you have those LEDs in the Haute42 products. These are linear switches, and as you can hear, it's pretty quiet sounding. I'm really trying to get out the tap, so that's probably cheating. In controller, it's going to sound different, but we'll show you that in the lab. And these are polycarbonate switches, so they feel a little bit stiffer, a little bit firmer than, say, the wind engine palm. So if you're used to the Shadow series by Low-Free, these will feel a little bit more bitier, I guess. Anyhow, we'll show this off in the lab, compare it to the wind engine and a base V2 red. Next up item in these mini review series is the wind engine switches by Cosmox. Now these are palm switches, so they are a kind of a softer, smoother, self-lubricating plastic. Here's me just jabbing it. And I think they're very similar, if not identical, to the Low-Free Shadow Series Ghost switches. So if you like linear switches, you just want down-up, and you want something that's pretty quiet, does the job, feels nice and smooth, then the wind engine might be for you. So let's get to testing it. Before going down to the lab, I do want to show you how to do a little bit of customization for your T16, T16 Pro. Really, this sort of process applies to a lot of the Haute42 controllers. So, anyhow, let's talk about how to change switches. Now, to get to the switches, you just want to pull off one of these keycaps, and sometimes you can do it with your fingers, especially like G16, really easy to do. If you have trouble, you can just wedge a little flathead in here. Try to do it from both sides, and top and bottom generally work best. There is a little notch there, and you should be able to get it off without too much trouble. Just be careful you don't use too much force and fling your keycap into who knows where. Now, to remove these switches, you can try a switch puller. However, I found it's very obstinate here. So what you might have to do is you can either open up the entire controller and punch it out from the other side, or just take, I'm using a knife here, just kind of ply it up just enough, and then you should be able to get in with the keycap puller. I almost didn't need it there, but there you go. Now, to replace the switch, you just want to make note, watch where the little pins are, and watch where the pins are here. Obviously the center pin is easy, but the others not so much. So just launch that in there, and then press down once you've got it lined up, and you should get some clicks all around, like it'll snap in, just like so. Then all you have to do, line up the cross with the plus sign and press down. And there you go, you've changed the switch. Up next, let's show you how to insert artwork into your T16, R16, what have you. Let's pretend you've got it printed, cut, etc. How do I get in there? How do I do it? Now there's a series of carriage pins and screws at these holes, and I've gone ahead and removed them. The trick to getting these is just hold it with the finger on the underside. Use a Phillips 1 or 0 like I'm using here, and you can unscrew that, and it should drop right out. If it's fussy, just shake it a little bit. Alright, so from there we can pretty much take apart our T16, get a good look at it, and just remember the order of the layers. And I do recommend gloves. Definitely keeps your fingerprint smears from making a mess. And watch for any stray cat hair, like I always have to do. Anyhow, let's apply that up, and there is your top layer. So just make sure those smears are on the other side. Now you may need, depending on the art you make, to pull off the top caps, but let's just go ahead and try to insert what I have on there as is. In mine, I did laser cut artwork. Okay. And yep, it fits right on there. So once you position it, it's just take your T16 or other controller, whoops, and place it back together. Alright, I also had the rear artwork, but I want to put this layer back on so it's not making contact with that. Just make sure it's lined up with the pins. Make sure all these line up as well. And then what I'll usually do is just kind of tap the stack like so. Make sure it's all lined up. Then while you're holding it, go ahead and get at least one pin, line that up and hold it, because it's not going to want to stick, and get its corresponding screw. And when you take this apart, I always recommend you have a cup, a tin, whatever you want to just hold all those screws together. And if you're really organized, you can separate out the carriage pins and screws. And all you should need to do is just screw it back together. Now, of course, if you feel like it's going off kilter, just stop, back up, try again. But that one went in pretty well. And as always, when I'm working with multiple screws like this and a flat plane, I always try and work in an X pattern. You don't necessarily want to tighten everything up. Right away, anyway. Oop. Sometimes magnetism does not help. Alright, and then just from there, up here, here, and then you can kind of do the rest however you like. Just make sure that it's all fitting together and that none of your inserted art is exposed. After that, I'm going to show you a really cool tip for making sure that your controller doesn't slide around. I know they do include the little nubs or pads for anti-slip, but this stuff is the best. I'm going to show you it here in a minute. All right, now that the artwork's inserted, we can move on to that little thing I told you about that's going to make grip a lot better, prevent sliding pretty much entirely versus the stock nubs. But first, the more eagle-eyed among you might notice, hey, those screws are not silver, what's going on? And yes, I did replace these with these brass binding pins, and the stock ones are 10mm, but with the extra paper layer inserts, and I've got 4 because the top layer, the cutout layer, the bottom layer, and then on the back I have the same setup. So it did add a little thickness, and I was having trouble getting those stock ones back in. I think with work I could do it, but I think these look much nicer. Anyhow, you can get these at AliExpress. I think Focus Attack now carries some, and like I said, the stock ones are 10mm, these are 12, and the outer diameter is M3, I believe, so you need to be careful which ones you get or they won't fit. Anyhow, I did promise you, hey, what about grip and making sure this never slides around when I don't want it to? Well, there's a great product out there called Cat Tongue Grip Tape, and this is their glow-in-the-dark, actually. The problem is the stock stuff, and I've already modified it, is a little too thin. These will be higher than the grip tape, so it won't do any good. So what I do is I just take some 3M double-sided VHB tape, or the double-sided tape of your choice. With the tape here, 2 rolls of 24mm will work. And just stick it on the bottom like so. And when you're ready to go, you just apply it like this. So I give a little bit of spacing, and then just get it on as vertically as possible, then mash that down. And there's a clear, there's a black, so you can get the one that you like. Of course, this is glow in the dark, so if I turn off all the lights now, I don't know if this camera would pick it up, but there you go. And this is super sticky. It really works well on smooth, flat surfaces, and it still feels great in the lap. And with the double-sided tape on there, I have just enough thickness to overcome the binding screws. So that's a tip for if you are looking to really prevent this guy from sliding, if you have people that just tend to knock it around, or you're very crazily violent somehow when you're playing, look into this grip tape. It's not that expensive, and just add some of the double-sided tape. You'll be fine. All right, let's do a little lab time with the T16 Pro just to show you the difference in switches mostly, because, well, the acrylic's the same really. Pretty much everything is the same. I've already pointed out the real difference is those crystal switches. And so up top here, I have loaded the crystal switches. Also, they're also here. You can pretty much tell because the light transfer is really good with these crystal switches, of course, because they're all that clear body. On this bottom kick row, I've loaded the wind engine switches, and I've left in kind of those stock default V2 reds that you find in a lot of other Cosmox controllers. And again, I feel like they're moving away from it into the crystal switch just to let that light transmissibility. So let's go over some noise real quick. I don't have any sound reduction or compression in this, so let's give it a listen. And let's do a couple doubles. I'm going to say this in conclusions, but the T16 Pro I feel like is a great controller. It, you know, just increments on the regular T16. So if you don't have one already, the T16 Pro is what you should be looking at. It just has a few quality of life improvements that I feel make it worth it versus its stock, I guess, cousin. Anyhow, the BOOTER 5, I'll talk about it later, but it pretty much, you plug it in, you set it to PS5 mode, you can play as PS5. It is the lowest profile authentication device out there. If you really need something that's small and you're not worried about it getting lost, then the BOOTER 5 is going to do it for you. Okay, so that really brings us to our switches in this review, and that is the crystal and the wind engine. So how do I feel about these switches? Let's start with the V2 Reds, and I've done the review on my own channel before versus some other switches like the low freeze. And compared to those low freeze, I feel like the V2s, they're just clock punchers, you know? They kind of get the job done. They don't really have a real distinct feel. It's kind of just button up, button down, button up, down. And if you don't like anything, no real substantive feel to them, just kind of it's there, does the job, and the V2 Reds are okay. I do feel like the crystals are a nice incremental upgrade on them. The biggest thing with the crystals is really just the light transfer. So you can see how much brighter these guys are versus even the V2 Reds. So because of that clear body, you're getting almost 100% light transmission, right? And on a controller like this, where you already have clear caps, it's not as concerning. You do get a little bit more uniform light, so it looks prettier. However, on Cosmox's other controllers, where they have more opaque buttons, if you use a more opaque switch, especially like the wind engine, you can't see any LEDs, especially when you press it down. It just goes away. It's completely hidden, unfortunately. However, with the crystal, it's not your problem. Now, as far as feel, I feel like they're just a tiny bit snappier, and that makes them a little bit better to me, just a little bit better feeling. I just like something snappy and responsive, and I feel like the crystal does improve upon the V2 Red in that regard. Is it an extreme difference? I don't know. I don't know if I'm qualified to say that. It just doesn't feel like that dramatic a difference to me. So let's go into the last switch of the review, which is admittedly probably my favorite because I've been using pretty much the original low-free Ghost for a while, and I love the palm construction. That's the wind engine. And one for one, this is a repro of the low-free Ghost. I'm sure it's licensed or whatever. In a different colorway, yeah. If you like blue, then there you go. Now, of course, it does not have the light transmissibility of the crystal, so you can see that here it's not as pretty. But if you want functionality, the wind engine is not equaled. It just feels so nice. The palm construction just makes it, and it's a little detail, but just notice I can wiggle this, a little bit. Same for there. But when I come here, there's almost no wiggle at all, just a tiny bit. So if you want that 0.0001 more stability, here it is. But really, you come for just the feel. And I'm not a linear switch person, but when I first tried the low free ghost and by extension the wind engine, I was like, I'm gonna have to rethink that, because these guys feel pretty good. I mean, they have just a nice, really smooth feel. So if you want something clicky and crunchy, this is not it. However, if you like smooth, something that's, it has a different sound profile feel. It's, not dead silent or anything, but yeah, they just feel very nice, very smooth, very comfortable to play on for long sessions. So I put a setup in my other controllers of low freeze other switches, and I really like the results, and just it lets the controller melt away, and just lets me focus on the game while still feeling like I'm getting a nice, real tactile response. Yeah, these are not tactile switches, I know, but they still have a feeling that especially the reds just don't have. So again, these are my favorite switches in the group. Tired of your bare and boring fight stick? Want a look that sets your controller apart? Need an artist to help make that happen? If you want to rep your favorite characters or games on your stick, we can help. From collage style to full custom art, the Arcade Stick has you covered with options at several price points to help make your custom fight stick dream a reality. To learn more, head on over to thearcadestick.com. First off, let's consider the T16 Pro. Now, if you don't have a T16, then I feel like, yeah, this is a no-brainer that you should pick up the T16 Pro versus its, other counterpart, and then you're set, right? You have the crystal switches, and you have the little bit modified board that's just a little bit better. So, yeah, it makes sense just to go for the T16 Pro if you don't already have a T16 or similar product. Now, of course, if you have the T16, is there a real reason to upgrade? Not really. You can get the switches on their own, and it's a much more cost-effective upgrade than buying the whole unit. So that's the T16 Pro. I really like it a lot because I liked its predecessor. What about the crystal switches? And I feel like the stock crystal switches, they're a slight improvement over the stock V2 Reds, but would I go out of my way to get them? I like the palm switches a lot more, which I'll talk about in a minute. Being that they come by default in the T16 Pro, yeah, I think that's a welcome change. They do let you have a lot more light transmissibility, which is nice if you are really into the LEDs, especially if you have some of the Cosmox units that are all black. You practically don't get any LED action unless you use crystals, so there is that. Next up are the wind engine switches, and I've already talked about how much I like these palm-based switches. Yeah, again, they are reproductions pretty much of the low free ghost, but that's not a bad thing. I really love how buttery smooth these are, and even the linear variants, whether it's wind engine, whether it's low free ghost or Kale's own variant, they have a better presence than the crystals or the stock V2 Reds, which I really enjoy. The fact that they'll self-lubricate even over time means they're going to last a long time and feel great as you continue to use them. The only drawback, again, since they're opaque, if you have especially Cosmox units where they have opaque caps and you don't get a lot or almost no light transmissibility through here, which is unfortunate, but it is a fact of life. You can mitigate that with translucent caps, but again, that's another expenditure. Okay, last but not least, the BOOTER 5, this little guy, the authentication device that could. If you need the smallest PS5 authentication device out there, then the BOOTER 5 is it. I've seen the N5, the F5, the Magic Boots. All of them are bigger, even the Magic Boots. And yeah, if you need something that's tiny, unobtrusive, and will do the job without complaint, then the BOOTER 5 is it. All told, I think we've got some great products here, and if I didn't already have the T16 modified, then I'd be more enthusiastic about the T16 Pro. But for new folks who are new to the leverless ecosystem, T16 Pro is a great way to get into it. Again, just like I said with the review for the T16, you can start on the WASD if you're used to that, and then slowly get used to the more traditional leverless experience by using your thumb here. And it has a number of great features. The key switches, I think there are some of you that will favor the Crystal and some of you that will prefer the Wind Engine. They're both pretty good switches, and the BOOTER 5, well, it does what the BOOTER 5 should. It lets you play on PlayStation 5. It's tiny. The only drawback is if you're taking out of a unit and transporting it, it's very easy to lose. Thankfully, I haven't done that yet. So all told, I think these are pretty good products from Cosmux, and I can't go wrong with any of them. Hey everyone, I've got a kitty, and you guys should know what that means. I'm going to shamelessly exploit her for likes, comments, and subscriptions. Seriously, if you found the video insightful, informative, entertaining, just had value to you, please leave that like. Or if you like Ellie, that's a good enough reason too. I'll definitely make sure she knows about it. Now, if you have questions, suggestions, or just, this was the most useful part of the video for me, leave those down in the comments. And of course, if you want to see future content, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, all that good stuff that makes YouTube happy. And anyway, if you don't do all that, she's gonna get you.
VR Cage Stick.